Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Hidden Gems in the GL module for GP. If you're like me and you've used Great Plains for a long time, or Microsoft Dynamics GP or Dynamics or all of the various names that it's had over the years, you may feel like that there is nothing hidden in the GL section and that you know everything about it. Well, I'm hoping to surprise you and show you some things maybe you haven't thought of before or have not used. So I'm going to start off kind of using as my guide to determine what I'm going to show you is I took a look at the setup menu in the financial module. I've already got one screen open, but I'm going to use some of these features that are listed in setup as where I'm going to go with what are some of our hidden gems. So the first thing you may see, I've already opened up the category setup screen, and I've stretched out the screen, and hopefully you can see my small pop-up screens. Unfortunately, I could not change the resolution on my screen without losing some functionality. So this is as big a screen as I can get for these menu pop-ups. Anyway, I've stretched out this category screen so that you can see that you have 48 default categories. And you may think, why are you showing me anything about categories? It's basically a dead, a dead field, something that we don't pay attention to anymore. I know when Great Plains first came out, it seemed to be very important because that was the way we built our financial reports. And then we got away from that and we're using our account ranges, and a lot of people ignore the category field. So why am I bringing it up? Because I believe it's returning to have some importance for your financial building. As you know, with Management Reporter not being improved upon, a lot of people are moving towards JET reports to build their financial reports. And what we have found in building JET reports, that it is often so much easier to create those reports if the user is actively using categories and thoughtfully using categories. So as you know, when you look at the account setup screen, you have categories that are assigned to every single account. And what a lot of people may not realize is that these category names can be changed, they can be added to, they can be removed. You can have less categories, you can have more categories, change the names. So I could highlight cash and change that to some other name. I could remove some of these or just rework all of the names so that they're in different orders, or put them, include additional categories that I think were useful in grouping on financial reports. You'll notice here on the bottom that I've already included a miscellaneous category. And what GP does on this screen is puts an asterisk for any new category. So I could go down here, I could have 40, 50 new categories, and I would always see the asterisk as the number. That's okay. In the background, in the tables, what's actually happening is that this asterisk for miscellaneous becomes the number 49, and so on down the line. There will be numbers assigned to these categories even if you don't see them in the screen. And then those categories might be very helpful in building reports. They can be used even in Management Reporter, but if you are phasing out Management Reporter and moving towards JET, they certainly can be very helpful in quickly building those JET reports. So I wanted to bring up categories just to point that out. So the next item on the setup menu is segment. And a lot of people, when you first install GP, kind of ignore this because maybe they're adding their accounts by importing them. And they bring in their, over here on the account maintenance screen, they're bringing in the account, the description, the category, and the setups. And when they bring that in through an import, the segment setup is not done. So if I click on the segment and we drill down on the segment ID of division, what happens when you import is the number is created, but no description is assigned to the segment. For something like a department or a subcategory where maybe you don't have a lot of different ones, it's very easy to come in and I could choose 00 and just put in general, and I'm done. So those are nice and easy. It's asking me, do I want to roll down changes? I'm going to say no to that. But for that segment, that main account segment where you may have hundreds of them, to manually add that description may be a bit of a pain. But why I'm bringing it up as a possibility of something to use and consider is if you do not have an easy way to create new accounts. Say you do not have a tool to import your accounts after your initial startup. If you do not have an integration tool of some sort to bring in your accounts, then the nicest way to create new accounts for new departments would be to use your mass modify. And for your mass modify to copy not just the account number, but to tweak the description to be unique for each department, what you would need is to have these descriptions all set up. Because in mass modify, what it'll do, it'll go in and say, I have a new division 431 for, I can't think of a name, just call it miscellaneous division. And I want it to say miscellaneous dash checking. Then what mass modify can do is it will grab the descriptions from this segment setup and make them unique for each department. If you don't care that the descriptions are unique, you want checking to be the same across all accounts, or say payroll or banking fees or utilities. You don't want it to say administration dash utilities or marketing dash utilities or something along that line. You just want it to be the same description. Then mass modify without any segment descriptions works fine. But if you do want unique descriptions and your only option to create new accounts for departments, then I would say come in when you have time and start filling in, start creating these descriptions for your segments. And then when you're mass modifying or creating new accounts for departments, you'll notice that you can get the account description from account segments. And it'll give you a warning that if there is no description in the account segments, then you're not going to get a description. So you pay attention to that warning. But by using this in mass modify, you can create uniquely named account descriptions based on the department and the main account segment descriptions. You can also include a description that comes from maybe a sub-account. As long as the descriptions exist in the segment setup, then you can create them through mass modify. Let me bring up this account screen again and just point out something also that you may have seen from from when you are creating new accounts. So here we have an existing account. Let me save this. And let's say I did want to create a brand new segment, 431 or 731. Let's try 731. And you see we get a pop-up that says a new segment will be created. Do you want to enter the description? If you say yes, then it brings you to this segment setup screen and you get a chance to add that description. I would say if you haven't been doing that in the past, don't ignore it. Say yes and add that description. You never know if down the line those descriptions could be useful, even if you haven't used them, if you aren't using them currently. Another thing I just wanted to bring up and why I wanted to show this screen is if you think this screen would be useful, but it doesn't pop up for you anymore, maybe at some point you or someone else in your company click this do not display this message again, so you don't get the opportunity to add the description. Then just wanted to point out there is no button or key or anything that you can do within GP, the front end of GP, to get this pop-up screen to come back. What you'd have to do is contact your partner and let them know you wish you had this screen and it's gone away. Can you bring it back? And there is a script we can write in your tables to get this screen to come back for you. All right, so let me just say no to this. And then when I'm in this screen, I want to move on to another thing I wanted to point out for you. And hopefully you're well aware of this, but just as a reminder, notice this checkbox, allow account entry. When you bring in new accounts, by default, this is always marked. And a lot of people just, since it's always marked, it's always there, it's one of those fields that a lot of people don't even pay attention to. What does it do? What this basically, by having it marked, says that this account you can enter general journal entries for. Now, of course, you're thinking, well, of course, we want to be able to enter general journal entries for my accounts, so we want it marked. But there are a few key accounts where you really shouldn't have this marked. When you think about it, you shouldn't have your accounts payable or your accounts receivable and even your cash accounts marked unless you're using another product for your bank reconciliation. If you're using the standard GP bank reconciliation, you know that you shouldn't be adjusting cash in the general ledger. So you really should have this unmarked so that you couldn't accidentally, without thinking, do a general journal entry for this account. Same with accounts receivable. You really should not be entering, and accounts payable. You really should not be entering any kind of general journal transaction in the general ledger. You should be doing it in those modules. Now, if you know there is an adjustment that has to be made and you've got the position in the company where you're allowed to make that adjustment to force a correction, then that person can come in here and mark to allow the account entry, do the necessary adjustment, come back and unmark it so there's no accidental posting to those accounts. Right. Another thing on this screen that a lot of people don't pay attention to is this field down here that is actually telling you how it's going to sort when you look up your accounts. So right now this is set up to look up by account. So it's going to look up by the whole account number. So if I clear this and I'm using my lookup glass, you're going to see that my lookup list is showing by order of the account number. So when I get down to, say, my departments, scroll down a little bit further here, trying to hurry through this. Now, see, when I get down to my departments, it's going to have the 200s followed by the 300s and so on, because that's my sort order, is to look at the whole account number. If I was to change this and say, I want to look at it by the main segment and use my looking glass, then as I scroll down to those P&L accounts, I'm going to see when I get to a particular number in the main segment, it's going to show me those numbers by all the departments, and then before it moves on to the next number in the main segment. That might be useful in your lookup. And also to be aware of this change here in the account maintenance screen will then affect your lookup in other screens, in your inquiry screens, in your account transaction screens. When you have to look up, it's going to reference your sort order on this screen to determine how your order looks in your lookup in other screens. Okay, let's see, let's kind of go back to the setup menus, and you see this transaction matching. This is something I really hadn't used in the past, and I'm, as a consultant, I don't probably have much use for it, but that doesn't mean that you as an end user may find some interesting ways to take advantage of the transaction matching. Transaction matching is a way to produce a report or information for transactions that have something in common. Their example of how best to use this might be if you have say a very miniature type of project that you want to track. In the setup screen that I didn't really show you, it just is a few choices of how you want it to work. But the main body of the work of using transaction matching is under financial transactions. And what you do is you create a group, say, or what they're referring to as a link. And I've created this link number 1, and I'm going to use an account I set up as an example. And I have to look up the year. And again, I'm all squished in. So yes, this is 2017. And you can see that for this account, this WIP material account, what I've gone and done is marked a few transactions that I'm saying applies to this project 358 from this account. So I didn't have to create a unique account. These are entries that went to this account, or I can then choose another account. I'm still under link number 1 and mark some transactions that went to all sorts of various different accounts. And then once you have those marked, you can print a report. And I believe I may already have created, let's see if I can find my example. Here's a transaction matching. So this is what this report looks like when you click on the transaction matching report. After you've selected those items, it'll show all your debits and your credits. You see I have some information from 2 different accounts showing here, and then my overall balance. So this might be a way if you wanted to pick and choose a few transactions and find out what the total is, instead of having to go in Excel and manually track a few entries to determine your overall expense for a small project. You can use transaction matching to determine what they have in common, and then create a report that gives you the values and the information for those entries. I thought that was nice. Now, I don't think it would be very handy for if you have big projects or a lot of analysis that you need to do. But for these little items, instead of having to do the Excel spreadsheets, I think this would be a handy tool to take advantage of. Okay, so going down this setup menu, let's skip over a few of these items. I'm not going to get into multi-currency. And let's take a look at inter-fund management. Now, I'm going to bring the screen over here to the side because I'm going to be doing some comparison here in a minute. But you may think, well, only not-for-profit would use interfund management. And while that may be the case the majority of the time, there could be some uses for profit companies. So the idea basically for interfund management is within your own company, you may have departments or in this case, funds where you would want to track any due to, due froms between the interfunds. Say, Fund 300 covers the expense for Fund 200, then you would want to have a due to, due from those funds. Or maybe for a profit company, a Department 300 covered some expenditures for Department 200, and you want to track that. You want to show a due to, due from between departments. Now, there are a couple different ways where you can set up interfund management. You can use a single due to, due from account where the due to, due from for Department 100 is the same account whether it's owed from Department 200, 300, or 400, and so on. Or you can use this clearing fund central treasury and create a unique due to, due from each that applies to each department. Now, I don't have this activated because I'll tell you, once you turn it on, it certainly applies to every single transaction that would have some crossing between departments. So you want to be sure that's really what you want to do. But I did have this turned on temporarily, and I did a transaction in the general ledger before this demo. And I want to show you that transaction. So what this journal entry was, and this is the edit list from that journal entry, it was simply a movement of, or a booking of expenses from the sales department, moving it out of the sales department to the administrative department. So this was my entry, just the 100 to 300. But what happened is once that's saved and with Activate Interfund Management turned on, what it does is it goes and looks at my setup and says, okay, based on this information over here, I'm going to create these due to, due froms for each department. So the 300 department has its due to, due from with the offsetting treasury account, and the same for the Department 100 with its offsetting treasury account. So, or central bank, however you want to reference that. So this is what it would look like if you're using interfund management with the central fund account method. Right, so obviously you can see I'm going to leave this turned off because I don't want it to affect everything that I've entered. All right, so let's move down to cash flow forecast. Cash flow is kind of a nifty little tool that has been mostly ignored. It's been around for a long time. I believe most people have their own way of tracking their cash flow, but I want to show this to you for people who are not even aware of this as an option. The cash in the setup screen, the cash flow forecast is giving you a chance to set up those things you want to track so that it can help you make a forecast of how your cash is going to be moving in and out over the next period. So here I've created a forecast demo, and it's giving me an option of the things that I want it to include to determine my cash flow. And I've got the option of just tracking my general ledger account, or do I want to look at the banks? If I was to choose both of those, then I'd end up doubling up, because what affects these banks also affects my general ledger account. So what I did was I ignored the account, and I came and I chose the banks that I wanted to look at. I chose Uptown Trust and First Bank. And now I'm also telling it to take a look at my open and my work transactions in accounts receivable and my sales order processing documents. I don't want it to include quotes, because who knows when the quotes will be processed. I am only going to include the open transactions and purchasing, although I could choose those that are work, and my documents that are purchase order processing documents. Maybe those receipts that have not yet been invoiced, that are giving us an idea of when they'll be invoiced soon. And then we've got let's say this right, an option to add additional expected ins and outs of our cash that are not yet booked or in receivables and purchasing, and may not be booked until the last minute. So here I've come in and said, okay, as of 2017, on 4/25, I am expecting a big sale of $15,000. So I'm going to put that in there. But I'm also expecting some expenses of about $6,000, even though it hasn't been booked yet. So I just put that in to help me with my cash flow. So that's my setup. Oh, and then I also said, how many weeks do I want to go out to forecast? What do I want to look at in my forecast? So now that I've got this set up, we need to take a look at the actual cash flow. But before I do that, let me change my calendar to 2017, because in this Fabricam company, most of the transactions are still in 2017. All right, so let's take a look, and we're going to go to inquiry now and go take a look at the cash flow calendar. And here, so we now see basically in this cash flow calendar what the current balance is, but expected ins and outs that will affect that cash flow. So for example, that 4/25, that was the date that I put in the expected ins and outs for a big influx of money. Let's see if we can track this a little bit better, get the screen a little bigger. So if I take a look at this, I can see it is expecting that 15,000 income, 6,000 out. Let's see if there's any others. Oh, it's expecting a payment of $75 that will happen on the 25th. Let's see. It's not expecting any money in. So those were our three main transactions that were going to affect cash. I could take a look at any of these days, and if I wanted to drill down and see what is expecting. Oh, here's a big PO that it's expecting. So it might be useful for just kind of tracking what you expect to happen in the next few weeks, and hopefully you'll find that of some interest, or be able to experiment with the use of that cash flow forecasting tool. All right, the last item on our setup screen is this control account management. Now, after all the years that I've used GP, I was not aware of this and hadn't really paid attention to it. And I think it's kind of a cool idea. Here, I'm telling it that my account segment that I may want to create a control account is my division or my departmental segment, that first segment. And what a control account does is it applies to accounts payable and accounts receivable. So I clicked on accounts type, and what I've set up here is I've set up a payables, and I've told it what I want payables batch to be, the batch comment, and a reference on a general journal entry. So let's see if I can delete this row. Nope. Let me clear that. I was playing around with adding a department and it's still in there. So, but since there's no account, it'll be ignored. But what the idea behind this is, say I don't want to track in my data entry time frame or the data entry person to have to track if a particular payable entry is for department 100 or 200. Yes, I want the expense to go to the correct account, but do I want her to have to think about what payable account it is? Not really. I just want one general payables account. And that's pretty typical. You could have hundreds of departments, but you may choose to have one AP account. Well, the idea behind the control account management is that it would allow you to, at least at month's end, find out how much of that payable is for each department. So what I did here is my main AP account is a 2100 account, but I created a departmental or division accounts payable account. So my 2104 plus the division makes up my accounts payable for each division. Now, my data entry person is still going to be putting all of the accounts payable into the 2100 account. But at month's end, what I can do with this setup is I can go over to my transactions and I can go to control account management. And you can see I've already done this to save a little bit of time. And what I did is I asked to generate a report. And when I do that, it automatically, or you see it process for a few seconds and it goes through all my AP, and then it provided a breakout of what this 11 million, actually how much of that is for each department. Now I can then produce a report. I've already done that. And if I clicked on save, I could regenerate it. But since I've already done it and saved it, I'm just going to go to my my reports that I've saved. So here is the first page of the report is the summary level, just kind of a breakout of what we saw on the screens, on the screen of how much goes to each account. The next report is a detail report, and if I wanted to look at all of the transactions that went to the various departments, I can scroll down here. I think I saw, we're still in the zeros here. We've got what AP accounts are associated with the 100 department. And if I continue down, I'm going to see it go through to other. Here we've got the 200 accounts and so on. So I thought that was really pretty cool. And then the second stage of this is not only do we get a report to see what the breakout should be, is let's close this and get back into GP. Now, when I go through that accounts management and create the report, the next step in that screen is it creates a batch for me. And if you remember from my setup, I asked the batch to be AP distribute. So I'm going to click on that and print the edit list so that you can see what happens. And it shows up on my other screen. Here we go. Okay, so what it's done is it created the split out dated 4/30, so that on my financial statements that I wanted to see this split out, I now have data for each department on what the accounts payable is for each department. But then on 5/1, it turns around and creates the reversing entry so that we get back to status quo for the throughout the month. And you can do this at the end of each month to create the split for your financial statements, then reverse it back. I really thought that was a slick idea to keep the work level down for your AP entry people. They still have just one AP account to use, but the split does happen for your financial reports. Okay, so let's move on. Let's take a closer look at some of the features that are listed under the cards menu of your financial module. And I know everybody is comfortable with accounts and checkbooks, and if you are interested in them, the account unit account entry screen is pretty clear cut. So I'm not going to talk about those at all, but I thought I would just give you a refresher of our fixed allocation and variable allocation options. If you have not taken advantage of them, it might be time to just remind yourself about this option and see if they would be useful to you in any way. So for example, on our fixed allocation account, how it works, well, I wanted it moved, not reduced. Okay, so let's use the utility account here, 6190 as my example. So what fixed allocation does in the setup is you find an account where, or if you have certain accounts where you know that the percentage split should go to various departments, and the percentage split is always the same. Maybe your utilities for your company is allotted by department, and 5% always goes to admin, 30% or 35% always goes to sales, and so on. Or maybe if the 300 is warehouse, it would make sense that they would use more utilities. However it is that you might split it, if you do have an even split between your departments all the time, I shouldn't say even, the similar split between departments every time you have it, and your AP person who is entering in these expenses always has to figure out, okay, 5% is this much, 10% is this much, then use a fixed allocation account, set it up. Then when they're doing their data entry, all they have to enter in is the main account, this 6190, and GP will do the calculations to evenly split the dollar amount of the expense to all of the various departments. Variable allocation account is a little more complicated because it does a split, but it's based on a unit account that you may have set up. And my example on this would be rent. So let me put in rent, 6180, and say you want to allot your rent expense to your department based on square footage. And you have the square footage set up as a unit account in GP, and you've indicated, okay, this department has 2,000 square feet, this department only has 800 square feet, and so on, and you want GP to do the work or the calculations based on that square footage. So here I've put in my main account, I put in the departmental or division account numbers that are for rent, And then for each account, I've indicated the unit account that indicates the square footage for that department, and so on here. So GP can now use a little bit more complicated calculation to determine how much money for rent should go to each department based on their square feet. Now, there may be other examples that you could come up with. Maybe there's something that you want to split by the number of employees, something that varies quite frequently, and all an expense that'll split that way if you're tracking number of employees in a department. But the main gist of this, just like the fixed allocation account, is your person who's entering the transaction only has to put in the 0006180 account, and GP does the math and splits it between the departments based on this unit account that you use. So just a reminder of that functionality. I'm going to skip talking about mass modified because we touched on it a little bit when we talked about segments. And most people are quite comfortable with the budgets if you've been using GP for a while. But one thing that you may not have noticed that I wanted to point out is there is a way to consolidate budgets. So if you're one of these people that have been creating using the wizard here, you've created a massive Excel spreadsheet with your budget that has all your different departments, and then you're manually splitting them out because you don't want to give every department the exact same spreadsheet with all the information on it. There is a way, if you would prefer to instead build departmental spreadsheets or budget spreadsheets, have them turn that in, import those departmental budgets in, and then combine them in GP, because as you know, in Management Reporter and JET reports and everything, you can basically you need a single budget to do your comparisons and variances, and also when you have multiple budgets for 1 year that you need to combine. For example, I've got two for 2014. I can go to budget number 1, and I want to open this using GP instead of Excel. And you notice I have this combine budgets button here. I can click on this and say, I want to combine budget number 2 with budget number 1 and process that. I had actually I won't do this because it takes a few seconds, but I had actually had 3 budgets, and that's why for 2014, and now there's only 2 because I already combined budget number 3 in with budget number 1. So if you weren't aware of that and you wanted to be able to have multiple spreadsheets but didn't know how to get a single budget out of those spreadsheets without a lot of manual manipulation in Excel, this is your way to do that. All right, the last thing I'm going to mention is this analysis groups. We talked about transaction matching as being maybe a useful tool for very small projects. A little bit bigger coverage, I guess, would be analysis groups where you could take a look at your expenditures or have expenditures split to various projects or vehicles or individuals based on your setup of these groups. So what I've done here in my analysis groups is, as an example, I set up maybe property management or rental income, utilities, as something that I want to track. All right. And then in my analysis defaults, let me see here. I chose, let me choose account 6230. Okay, this is actually a vehicle group that I set up. And what I've done here is I said, okay, for my depreciation expense, I want it to automatically split it out evenly, basically, between 3 vans that I have here. And I've made this a required analysis. So when transactions are entered and I use this particular account number, it will create the split for me so that I can track what my expenses are for each one of these vans, even though they're going to one individual account. Now, I've also done this for a couple other accounts. Let me change this to 64100. And the only difference in this one, I did the even split, but I made it optional, which gives me a little bit more power at the data entry time. I could wipe out or I could change these percentages if I needed to for a particular entry. And then on another one that I had as an example, let me change the account to 461.0. Okay, you'll see that what I've done is I don't have any split. I've listed the vehicles that I want the expense to potentially be split between, but there's no amount in there. And this is going to give me complete control at the time of entry of how to split this expense between vehicles. And to show you a little bit about how that works, let's go into a transaction that I've created already, and I've called it MDA. The name before analysis groups and analysis defaults in GP was multi-dimensional analysis, and so that's what I used as my abbreviators for the batch. And let me pull up this entry here. So what I've done is I've just created a transaction that is booking or moving around information or data to my accounts that affect those multi-dimensional analysis accounts. And you can see this screen looks completely similar to any other journal entry screen. How can you tell it's a multi-dimensional analysis entry? Well, as I click on an account, you notice here everything stays the same because this is an account I set up in the analysis defaults. But if I click on here, all of a sudden this little button here becomes active. You can see if I flip back to the other one, it's grayed out. Click on this, it becomes active. And this is an analysis accounts group. And so, or screen, or it's saying that I can drill down on this screen. So if I click on this screen, you can see it's taken my dollar amount of $690 and done the split for me. It was required. It automatically did that for me. So I'm going to say okay. Now as I go down on my examples here, 6410, this also did the split, but notice it was optional. So I can say, well, I don't want it to be split between these vehicles. I just want it to be in a general expense, so I can delete it. So I'm going to just delete that split. And then on this one, if I drill down on it, you can see it's given me a warning because it's an optional, but there's no amounts in here. So I can say, well, this vehicle expense, $1,023.75 was for vehicle number 1, and 700, not 7,000, And where'd my screen go? Here we go. Come on. 700. There we go. So I split it out between two vehicles. I fully split it. So it's going to accept that. My warning sign is gone, and I'm going to say okay. Now, afterwards, I'm not going to go to all those screens, but afterwards, I could now use an inquiry or a report to take a look at my expenses for vehicle number 1, 2, and 3 because of the splits that I made here. All right, so let's close that down. So, moving out of cards, I want to take a little bit of time in this general journal screen. Now, everybody thinks they know everything about this screen, and you may. But in case you've kind of ignored, if you've had GP a long time and you see the ribbon didn't used to exist. Now we have a ribbon. Now we have some new buttons along the ribbon. And if you've kind of ignored some of those new features, I want to talk a little bit about them. So let's first talk about this paste button up here. Now, if you do not have a third-party product that allows you to copy paste into your general journal entry, and there are tools out there that allows you to copy into general journal. It allows you to copy into vendors and accounts and AP transactions, bank transactions, AR transactions, all over the place. And those tools usually function in multiple screens, and GP does not have built-ins for any of those other screens, but they do have a built-in copy paste option for the general journal entry. So if you don't have those other tools, this is your choice. If you have the other tools, you'd likely just continue to use those other tools. But for example, let's say you have some big journal entries that you need to enter, and maybe you enter them regularly. Maybe they're one-time entries, but let's do the top part of my journal entry, and I'm going to leave my date, and I'm just going to call this test copy paste. Okay, so I want to put in a journal entry. I have to fill up the top part, and then I need to get my cursor on the first line of where I want to start filling in accounts. And then let me bring up, I've created this sample spreadsheet. And you have to have these 4 columns for the GP copy paste to work. And while it seems to be a little out of order, normally you'd think of account first, debit, credit, then the description, but this is the order it must be in. You must have your description first. Now that description field, if I go back into GP and take a look at this screen, that description field is what normally shows up on this third line. A lot of people ignore it, don't put anything in it. It's not required, but it is required as part of the copy paste. It can be blank. You can leave it empty. For example, I'll take this out of here, but you have to be copying the 4 columns. And include that as a possible field when you're using the copy paste. So now when you copy paste, you do not copy including the headers. So when I want to copy this transaction, I'm just going to use my typical process that I would use in Excel, highlight the fields that I want to copy, choose copy, go back to my GL screen, and click on paste. And there, it just filled it right in for me. Now I could actually, I believe, put my cursor here. Let's try this. Copy. And put my cursor here. Nope, It won't, you just have to have your cursor in the first spot. I think that may be another tool where you could copy in various places, but for GP, you're copying in the whole entry from your first line. And you can see as I open it up, I get those unique descriptions that I had on the spreadsheet, this one that doesn't have a description. And also, very easy to use if you haven't paid attention to this and all would like to copy paste. I think that would be helpful to you. Another tool that is often ignored is the way to correct or copy your journal entries. There's various methods where you can have recurring batches and all, but if you have got a transaction that you want to copy that wasn't in a recurring batch, you can use our tools up here. So if I click on copy, now the one thing you should be aware of that both the copy and the correct tool really should only be used for transactions that originated from the general journal. You don't want to be copying transactions that came from another source. You don't want to be backing out transactions that came from another source. Those should be corrected in those original modules. But a general journal entry, which this April transaction is a general journal entry, I selected it, I said okay, and it filled in my transaction for me. And notice the original date had been 4/12. It put it on the date of the transaction, and it left my reference blank. Now I can, at this point, I can change my date, I can input a unique reference, and I can make minor modifications if I felt like it. Okay, this time this amount is $300 instead of $280, or this account is not included, or I need to add an additional count at the bottom. I could do that, but it just gets me 90% of the way there, and then I can make any adjustments I need to. All right, so I'm not going to change this or save this, so I'm going to delete this transaction. Now, what about the correct button? What if you have a situation where you put in a general journal entry and you need to back out that journal entry, or better yet, you need to back it out and then create a new entry that is very similar to the original entry. So I'm going to choose back out a journal entry and create a correcting entry. And I'm going to select that exact same entry just because I know it is a general journal entry. And I'm going to choose April. And I'm going to say OK. All right. So now instead of debits, I have credits because it's backing out those transactions. And it's dated 4/30. So it dated it the same date, and it gave me a reference that it's backing out journal entry 3688. Great. So that's the first step. It's backing it out. I'll just save that transaction. And then as soon as you save the backed out entry, up comes the new entry, and it gives you a new reference. It's correcting journal 3688. So now I can change my date. Maybe the entry was fine. The date should have just been 5/1 instead of 4/30. It should have been in a different month. Or maybe there are some changes that I want to make to the account numbers. Maybe this should have been a different account number. And also, just like the copy, I can manipulate this particular entry to be what the corrected one I want. I've found that very handy in actual use when I find mistakes. All right. I'm running out of time here. I've been taking too long, so I'm going to skip over the budget transactions, but just as a reminder to you, if you need an audit trail code of changes you make to your budget, that's the idea behind budget transactions. Instead of just going to your budget spreadsheets and changing them and re-importing them with new information. There's no tracking to those changes when it's done that way. So if you need tracking of changes, use your budget transaction to make changes to your budgets. Okay. All right. I'm just taking a look at some of our other features that I haven't looked at very often. Period consolidation under routines now. Take a look at period consolidation. And this is not something I would recommend you use without consulting your partner. The idea of this is to summarize every entry to accounts so that you have a single entry per period per account. Now, obviously, I would never suggest you do this during years that could be audited. But if you've been using GP so long that you've got open years or historical years that are in detail, dating back to the early 2000s or even 1990s, then you've got so much data in there that maybe you would want to consider choosing a very old historical year and consolidating all of those details into one summary entry. Just be aware that once you do it, it can't be reversed, and you can't, and of course you can't post to it after the fact, but I would assume a very old entry you would not be posting to a particular period. Let's see, and what else? And then when you're using your inquiry screens and you're looking at that historical year, you will no longer be able to see that history. Okay. If you're not aware of it already, another feature that has been added in more recent versions of GP is this reverse historical year. And if you find yourself in a situation, obviously you don't want to have to use it, but if you find yourself in a situation where you've closed your year and you're finding a bunch of mistakes that need correcting, something just isn't reporting right, maybe you had account numbers set up wrong and need to fix those. In the past, there used to be a lot of hoops you had to jump through to make those corrections. Now they've got this option where you can actually reverse a historical year. Of course, you'd want to do a backup first, and you can only reverse the most recent historical year. If you had to go back 2 years, you'd have to reverse the most recent year and then reverse again to get 2 years back, and do your corrections, then close your year. I would recommend talking to your partner before making this choice, and again, to be sure you have a backup. But it is handy. We've used it a number of times since it's come out when helping clients with mistakes that have happened. All right. I'm going to skip over checklists and this reconciled transaction maintenance, just touching on this a little bit. If any of you are familiar with the sales module, you know that as part of your month-end routines, they recommend that you use a routine called remove transaction history, which really all it does is it moves sales transactions from an open status to a historical status. Then what happens in sales is then it becomes, if you find a mistake after it's moved to history, it's very difficult to reverse it. And also they make it a separate routine instead of it automatically happening like it does in payables, because it is so hard to reverse. You want to consciously think about whether you want to move it to to history. Well, this is kind of the same idea, but for bank transactions. I had never even thought about it, but all of our bank transactions stay in an open status. And also this routine would move those transactions to a historical status. You can choose to the cutoff date to be, a month earlier or 2 months earlier, so that you don't close anything that should not be closed, or that could still come back maybe as uncleared or rejected from the bank. So I'm assuming this just helps with cleanup, and hopefully that will be helpful to you to keep your records nice and clean. All right, the last thing I just want to touch on is let me get this out of the way, is the power or the professional services tools. And I've gone to my home menu. This, if you do not have it installed, is a tool that is free now with GP. In the early days, you had to pay for it, but it's free, and it is typically restricted to just your essay or your Dyn essay user. The reason being because you can make such software affecting changes that they want to be sure that only the person with the right authority can use this tool. And when you install professional services tools, the library is not immediately available. You have to go through a couple steps to make the library screen available to you. But what want to focus on once you have this tool installed is that you'll notice that there are a few financial tools here. The main one I want to talk about is this account modifier or combiner. So what this tool will allow you to do is to change or move an account or combine accounts into one account. You can combine accounts into one account, or say you want 1100, since I've been using that a lot today, 1100 to become 1101. Then I can say I want to put in 00, and I'm not sure if there already is an 1101, but I'm not going to actually push the button here, so I'm going to say that. Now, what would happen when I click convert is it will move all my information to 1101, history, all transactions, anything that touched 1100, all that history and all will get moved to 1101. So that is handy if you found that your accounts are wrong and you need some restructuring and all that you don't have to lose the history or leave the history in an old account that you don't want to access anymore. Now, it can be done one-on-one, or yes, it can be done to your chart of accounts as a whole. You can notice there's an import button here with the appropriately set up Excel spreadsheet where you have a column that shows your old account and a column that shows the new account that you want it to be. You can mass modify your accounts to a new account number and not lose history. It moves all of those over. Let's see. I would say the checkbook modifier is just if you don't like your checkbook IDs and you want to change your checkbook ID to a new ID. That's what you'd use your checkbook modifier for. Your first fiscal periods modifier, I would not recommend you use this without talking to a partner first. It doesn't accomplish as much as it seems to imply. If you're this is not a tool to use if you're changing your fiscal period or fiscal calendar from, say, calendar year to June 30. This will not take care of that. It's just, it only changes the name of the year. All of the transactions stay in the same year and the same periods. So if you have major changes related to fiscal periods, talk to your partner first. The GL Master triggers, this is a tool that can come in handy if you're creating a new GP database and you've got a new company and you want, say, your accounts, maybe your account numbers, maybe you want your vendors, maybe you want some of your master data that is in your current company to also exist in your new company. And all the GL Master Triggers is a tool that will allow you to replicate certain tables from your master database to your new database. And again, I would recommend consulting at least with your partner before you take advantage of that tool. All right, that's it. I hope I've shared something that is new to you, or you have refreshed your memory about a tool that you haven't taken advantage of, and have thought of something that you'll be able to use. Good luck to you in your GP work, and if we can help you in any way, feel free to contact Ingevity Support. Have a good day.